Hi Liam, and welcome to the Maestro Online.
Hello, thanks for having me.
So, where did your musical journey begin?
Well, there's a kind of apocryphal story about this, which I still don't know is true, but apparently when I was about 2 years old, we were in the car, and my nan and my mum and my dad and me, and they had the radio on, I don't know, playing what, and my dad turned the radio off because he wanted to concentrate, he didn't know where he was going or something. And I started crying, and my nan said, "That boy needs music." And that's kind of stuck in my head. That's the only thing I can remember about being two. But yeah, I always fiddled around on the piano. My other grandparents had a grand piano in their house, and I used to go around there and try and pick out tunes on it because it was the most interesting thing to do in my grandparents' house. And from there I kind of got into doing classical grades, the usual stuff. But my parents actually got me into Scott Joplin because they were big fans of The Sting, the film, and Scott Joplin's music features throughout in that film. So I got into learning Maple Leaf Rag, which I did by cutting out all the octaves because I couldn't reach them, and just learning the rest of it, and then I'd put all the notes in as I got bigger. But yeah, I got into Scott Joplin, and from there I got into Jelly Roll Morton. So my entry into jazz was quite traddy, like Fats Waller, all the stride players, and then I got into Duke Ellington, who's still, I think, my favourite pianist. And he, through Ellington's records at the local library where I lived in Bromley, I heard Coltrane, Coleman Hawkins, Max Roach, everybody. So that's kind of how it started, really, and I gradually veered into jazz and away from classical music because I could never get anything right with classical music. I always was fixing things and then something else would break, you know. So that's how it worked. I was relieved to find something where making mistakes was a kind of positive rather than negative attribute of the music.
So, did you go from learning what other people have written to improvising?
I think I always, when I started getting into trying to improvise, yeah, I mean, I learnt transcriptions of Jelly Roll Morton's music and stuff like that, which was technically quite difficult. But when I got into Ellington, obviously he plays in a very sparse way. One of the first records I heard of his was Ellington and Louis Armstrong, made in the 60s. And that record, everybody stretches out, but it's very, very sparse. Ellington kind of plays with one hand, almost one finger sometimes. So it was very free and loose and not virtuosic at first. So it was a kind of easy way in, I think. Easier than sometimes when people come straight into jazz to education first before listening more. It's harder because you're presented with a lot of information and you feel like you've got to be able to play well, whereas if you listen to music you just feel like you've got to be able to swing, which is a lot, I wouldn't say easier, but it's more fun as a way into the music, I think.
So at what point do you think, well, when you talk about this kind of more sparse texture, often jazz music with a sparser texture requires a higher sense of musicianship because there's a stronger sense of pulse and how you play around over that pulse. Yeah. There's a stronger sense of, because you're using less notes, which notes am I choosing to use? Whereas in perhaps more the Jelly Roll Morton kind of thing, it was more obvious what notes to choose and the rhythmic patterns were often very similar.
Yeah.
At what point do you think you developed that musicianship to appreciate and understand this more sparse texture?
I don't know. I think it really happened when I first started playing with other people. I mean, I think that's incredibly important. You know, I did play with records a bit. I also played the clarinet, I should mention. So I kind of wanted to be Barney Biggard or Jimmy Hamilton or any of the Ellington clarinet players for quite a while. So I could play along with recordings, but I think, you know, the feeling of being in a room with people and it going well is something that you can't really get on your own. You obviously have to prepare on your own, but that feeling of sort of community is very, very important.
And so then you were learning to listen to other players as well, and fit in with them or respond to them or adapt according to what other people were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when you're playing jazz in a group, in a sense, you're playing the whole band. So you're listening to what's going on and putting in what is appropriate for that kind of music. And some types of music, everybody goes nuts all the time, which is great, and you have to do that, otherwise it doesn't work. Other types of music, everybody's playing almost nothing, and that's very interesting too. And those outer reaches, I suppose, tend to happen more in the free improvised side of the music, which I also do quite a lot of. But in terms of playing tunes and on changes and stuff, there's a lot of kind of stuff that only really makes sense because somebody else was doing something and you responded to it. You know, so I think you have to understand when you're looking at transcriptions in particular that there's a part of it that is someone's vocabulary and their way of practicing and working, but then there's another part of it that is somebody that's been nudged in another direction, maybe in quite a surprising way, and they've gone with that, and that's why the solo suddenly goes in a different direction or suddenly takes on certain harmonic characteristics because the bass player's decided to just play one note and sit on it, or to drop out, or, you know, all kinds of things that could happen.
So to immediately respond to another player, that means you've already developed your ear, which I presume, when you mentioned playing along to records, that's part of that. Did you work things out by ear, or did you have transcriptions on a record, or...?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure. I definitely haven't been a big transcriber in terms of writing out whole solos. I mean, I had to do bits of that when I was at Guildhall postgrad jazz course 100,000 years ago. We did that as part of the coursework. But I think the transcription it can be quite a sliding scale. So you can know every note of a record that every musician plays. Like Miles Davis, Someday My Prince Will Come. I think I know in my head everything that happens, every bass line, every drum stroke, but I've never transcribed it, and I don't actually know, I can't reproduce it, but I know the sounds and the colours and the feels and the shape of things. And in a sense, with that record, it's helped me more. I think if I absolutely transcribed everything, it would sort of, it wouldn't be special to me anymore. But then there are other things that I've transcribed that still are special, you know. So it varies. Some things are just a bit sacred, and you don't want to delve too much into them, you know.
So how did you train your ear? Is it just the process of you've been learning these things and your ears naturally developed with it, or is it something you've deliberately worked upon?
I don't think I've ever deliberately worked upon it. I mean, I think for me having a good ear is just having a sort of hungry ear, really, like, if that makes sense. Like, I think when people have like, I can't draw at all, right? My son, who's 5, has a better sense of visual, a better visual sense of things than I do, because he draws all the time and he really loves it. And I think for me it was the same with music. I just listened to music all the time, and I was naturally curious, and I would go to the piano and then I couldn't get anywhere near it, and then I'd go back listen to it again, go to the piano again. I never really did ear training exercises or classes, and I've never really known how to teach ear training. I mean, I think it's a great thing to do, but I just wasn't lucky enough to do it, so I taught myself, I guess.
What about highlights in your musical journey and career? Are there particular moments that when you look back you think, oh yeah, that was special?
Ooh. There's been so many. I mean, I played with a lot of musicians older than me. I went through a phase where I played with a lot of guys, like a trumpet player called Harry Beckett, who's now passed away. He lived in Stoke Newington from Barbados. Brilliant trumpet player, played with Charles Mingus, so he had real experience. Bobby Wellins I played with regularly for years. He was just a great swinging tenor player with a very open mind, and really, really great to play with somebody for that long and get into their thought processes. And just, we did a gig every month for about 10 years, and so that was definitely a highlight. I've had my own bands which tend to combine kind of free improvised music with composed structures to one level or another, and that's been fun, but I always find that quite stressful. So I enjoy it in a different way. I kind of have to do it, so I do it, and when it goes well I like it a lot. But it's mostly, for me, there's lots of different things. I mean, also sometimes through teaching, when I teach at colleges and then I play with students. There's 2 students I used to teach who are in my band at the moment, who are both in their sort of mid-20s, I think. And it's great playing with those people and knowing that you were sort of there during their development, contributing something, or just not getting in their way, basically, in some ways.
So if somebody really, really wanted to further develop their jazz piano skills, or take a song that they love and make it into a great jazz piano piece, what pearls of wisdom, what advice, what would you say to them?
First and foremost, mess about on your own. I think it's so important to establish that kind of connection with whatever your instrument is on a really informal basis, like something that you do for pleasure. And then when you come to study, I find what happens with me is I sort of mess around with stuff, and then I get to a point where it starts to annoy me that I can't do something. And so I go after the solution. When you go after the solution, then you'll learn it quicker. So be led by your own musical preferences, because I think most people, when they get into jazz, they'll find the good stuff. Eventually they'll be led to Miles Davis, because you have to get to Miles Davis, you have to get to Duke Ellington, you don't have to stay there. I don't believe what Wynton Marsalis believes, for instance, that we must adhere to some strict definition of what jazz is. But I think people, he may say Max Roach is the best drummer in the world. I think if you leave people to listen to jazz and get into it, the people that get into it will get to Max Roach very quickly, because he's on lots of great records, and they'll get to Sonny Rollins and they'll get to Keith Jarrett and everybody else, because they're curious. And if they're not curious, there's no point in just giving them stuff. I think that's
final question for you. Which jazz pianist makes you most hungry?
Lord, it varies. I think I mentioned earlier that Duke Ellington was my favourite pianist. there's something about Duke Ellington and the fact that he's not really a jazz pianist in the normal sense, in that he's not virtuosic, and he doesn't really play solos. He doesn't even really play lines. But something about the sound he makes on the piano, for me, hearing Ellington when I was a kid, sort of convinced me that not every pianist had to sound classical. So like a lot of classical piano players will love Bill Evans because he's got a very refined touch, and they'll love Oscar Peterson because he can play fast. But they might be a bit mystified by Thelonious Monk. I mean, I think Monk and Ellington are my favourites because they're just so weird and they're so unclassical that they helped me make the shift, I think.
And finally, is there one thing in jazz piano or one idol you have that you would like to explore in the future? Where would you like your jazz piano playing to go next?
Well, I think I'd like to do another solo record. I've done 2 solo albums. One was when I just left college in the mid-90s, and the other one was 10 years ago. And I'd like to do another one. But I'm also getting more into keyboards. So I'm getting more into technology and using electronics in improvised music. So I think my career has kind of gone a bit like that. You know, in terms of my own projects, I'm focusing on the piano as a part of it and the electronics as a kind of new thing. And as a sideman, I love getting called by other people. So that's what I'd like most of all, is for more people to call me. Can you call me?
Liam, thank you very much. We'll get to call you.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.